only a couple of winning seasons over the last few decades, the Indiana Hoosiers were desperate for a change in culture. Curt Cignetti took a bet on himself. He took less money to be a sole head coach at the D2 level and then at two smaller D1 schools in IUP and JMU, leading them to an 11-2 overall record in 2023, which put him on the map and gave him the opportunity to get a coaching job at a Big Ten school, and a chance to turn around this Indiana program, which has been desperate for some success for a long time. And now, after dominating Washington on the big stage after hosting game day, the Hoosiers are looking legit. The big tests still are yet to come, but just the big change in culture has been a revelation for this program. And no matter what happens, people are going to potentially look at this season as the one that got the turnaround started. So I want to talk about what Indiana has done to get to 8-0, and I'm going to talk about what they need to do to give themselves the best chance to beat Ohio State and Michigan, or at the very least, split. But before I begin, I would really appreciate it if you would drop a like and subscribe. It only takes 5 seconds, plus you can always change your mind. We are on the road to 40,000 subscribers, and with your support, I believe we can get there super fast. And also, I apologize if there is not a ton of actual footage shown in this video. All the high quality clips are very hard to find for the schools that aren't as big on the college football scene recently. Alright, so before the beginning of this 2024 college football season, nobody had their eyes on this team at all, really. They were 3-9 in 2023, and they were picked to finish 17 out of 18 teams in the Big Ten. There was a massive roster overhaul this season. It was obviously needed, but you just never know how that kind of change is going to be on the field, especially early on. And I think Indiana did a really good job of scheduling a few easier games early on to get things situated before facing the real tests. And the thing that stood out to me in week 8 was the completeness of this team, because we all know about the Curtis Rourke injury. For most teams, that would have been a major setback. Obviously, it still was for Indiana, but Taven Jackson was able to step right in. And also, statistically, he wasn't very impressive with only 124 yards with a touchdown and an interception, but he was a game manager. And Washington is not an easy team to beat. They were in the national championship game just months ago, and could have had a better shot at winning it if Michigan wasn't a bunch of cheaters. But anyways, from what we saw today out of the Hoosiers, this is a team that is very well rounded. Still does have room for improvement in several aspects, obviously, but beating Washington by 14 with a backup is very impressive. And all eyes were on this game, with college game day being hosted on Indiana's campus for what ended up being a special day for Lee Corso. The whole thing was great to see. Obviously, he is getting a lot older and isn't 100% all there, but it's still great to see him get to ride out the final years of his life like this. Anyways, getting back on topic, let's go back to the beginning of the season and talk about what the Hoosiers did to establish this new culture and get a few W's under their belt, which is huge for a team that has not really seen many winning seasons in the recent past. But even before that, on December 14th, Curtis Rourke announced that he would be transferring to Indiana after 5 seasons at Ohio. At the time, he was ranked number 17 amongst quarterbacks in the transfer portal. As a 5th-year senior in 2023, he earned second-team All-MAC honors. He completed 195 of 307 passes for 2,207 yards with 11 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So he definitely came over with a lot of collegiate experience, and that was a big thing for a new head coach taking over a huge program like this to get. But nobody knew how Rourke would actually perform on a Big Ten level. Even the diehard fans who were optimistic could have never predicted what we are seeing today. In the first game of the season at home against FIU, Curtis started the season off strong with 180 yards through the air and a touchdown. And the backfield just took over, with Elijah Green, Tyson Lawton, and Justice Ellison combining for 224 yards with 3 touchdowns. So the performance out of those guys and the offensive line really set the tone early for this team. And then game 2 against Western Illinois, not really much to talk about. Just kidding. Only a final score of 77-3, with Rourke and the backup Taven Jackson throwing for 372 combined yards with 3 touchdowns. And Elijah Surratt and Mark Hooper had big games at receiver, putting their names on the Indiana scene. So moving on to week 3 with a record of 2-0, Indiana would travel on the road to take on UCLA. At the time, we didn't truly know how bad that team was, but this was the first real team they would face. And it was straight domination, with Rourke throwing for 307 yards and 4 touchdowns, without throwing any interceptions. And after this game, all the local eyes were on this guy. It looked like Indiana was finally on the right path after years of misery. Week 4 was against Charlotte, Another game that Indiana was supposed to win, and again, I know the teams I've been listing so far are not all that impressive, but for a team that had struggled in the past, just stacking wins was very important, and obviously was not a guarantee. Against Charlotte, Indiana would put up 52 points with another huge game from Rourke, without a turnover, and the running backs all chipped in together for a pretty big game. And then going into week 5 against Maryland, this was the game everyone wanted to see. Again, I know it's Maryland, not a powerhouse, but it was a team in the Big Ten. So everyone wanted to see if the offense could put up the same type of numbers against a much more competent defense. And yep, they did. Rourke did finally turn the ball over a couple of times, but he threw for just under 360 yards and had 3 touchdowns. And in the backfield, Lawton and Ellison each had a rushing touchdown. And the Hoosiers put 42 points up on the scoreboard before everything was all said and done. So now at 5-0, all eyes were on the Hoosiers, who still had much more to prove at Northwestern. Northwestern is a team that over the last decade has liked to grind out games. They haven't done a lot of winning, but the scores are typically around the 20-point range. So this was another test on the road for Curtis Rourke. But he went into Martin Stadium and dropped 41 points off 380 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. This game is when a lot of people really started to hop on the hype train, with a big game against Nebraska coming up after the bye week. Nebraska, of course, has Dylan Raiola, also known as Walmart Patrick Mahomes, but nonetheless, this was a Big Ten team with a winning record, and holy cow, Indiana completely dominated from the jump. Any expression for a massive beatdown you can think of, that is how you can describe this game, but unfortunately, Rourke obtained an injury that would end up being a minor setback to him and the team. At least we all thought it would be a setback, and this dominating win over Nebraska really looks different now after seeing Ohio State barely squeeze out a 4-point win over them. It's really making me look forward to watching the Hoosiers face them on the road. I think they can hang around, but only time will tell. And the key to beating Ohio State is to shrink the game and let them make the mistakes, because Ryan Day loves to outcoach himself. We saw it in the Oregon loss, where the game was pretty much won, but they lost it themselves due to very poor clock management and late game decisions. But before we can really look into that game, let's talk about the win over Washington with backup quarterback Taven Jackson behind center. As I mentioned, he served more as a game manager, and the backfield did majority of the heavy lifting. But overall, I was just impressed at how Indiana performed in every aspect of the game. The receiving core was pretty good for who was throwing them the ball, the offensive line was okay, and the defense was exceptional, holding Washington to only 17 points. The defense that has prided itself on being the best in the country forced turnovers and stymied the Washington offense to the point where they didn't know what hit them. Defensive stops kept coming back, coming up with plays, Indiana head coach Curt Cignetti said following the win. We gutted it out. The Hoosiers got off to a fast start in the first quarter, forcing a quick 3-and-out on the game's opening possession. After the offense punted the ball back to Washington, the Huskies pounded the ball down to the Indiana 31. But D'Angelo Pons sniffed out a screenplay, picked off Will Rogers, and dashed 65 yards to the south end zone to give the Hoosiers defense its first touchdown in Big Ten play. The pick 6 was the first of Pons' collegiate career. It felt unreal, he said post-game. I prayed for it, and it happened. There were so many other things that I could talk about in this game, but overall, the Hoosiers just handled business, and now all of a sudden, they go on the road to East Lansing to take on Michigan State with a record of 8-0. Is it too early for Indiana to crack the top 10 rankings? That's not for me to decide. But all I do know is that they control their own destiny, and this team has been a lot of fun to watch. I'm not going to count any chickens before they hatch, but Michigan has not looked very good this season. Really, the only game I see Indiana potentially losing is Ohio State. And even that one, at the moment, is looking very winnable if Indiana is able to lock in and not make mistakes. That's really all I have for this video. It's been a wild ride for Curt Cignetti and this group, and I don't expect this wave to end anytime soon. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts on this team are, and if we still need to see them against Ohio State and Michigan before we can really say who they are. Thank you all so much if you made it to this point. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, because your support truly does mean the world. And also, let me know what you would like to see next. Until then, I will see you all later.